Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and welcome to the next lesson in our D programming language series. In this lesson, I want to go ahead and revisit something we've been talking about in this series, and that's the ref keyword. But this time, we're going to look at it in the context of a for each loop. So let's go ahead and revisit loops briefly and see how ref works. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is what's different with for loops versus what we've been doing with function calls and previously talking about things like pass by reference and so on. But with that said, let's go ahead and look at a demo here and see exactly what's going on. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and just create a array here, and I'll create a dynamic one called numbers, and let's just go ahead and populate it with something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. Now, a really nice feature again of the D programming language is for each loops here. Now I could go ahead and say I to refer to each of the elements, or let's give it a better name like element in our number. And let's go ahead and make this plural just for better naming here. And then we can go ahead and write out each of the elements here. So let's go ahead and just run this code really quick, see what happens. Again, as expected, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now within this for each loop, let's go ahead and say that we wanted to change the actual element. So let's go ahead and say element equals 6 now. So they'll all just be 6. And let's go ahead and see, well, if this actually modifies our numbers here. Now, when I go ahead and run this, let's go ahead and see if it even builds in the first place. So if I try to compile this, well, in fact, it looks like we are able to change our element, so that's fine. And in the context of this for each loop, it is setting things equal to 6, so that means we're writing it out. But again, when we write out our numbers, nothing's changed in this list. We still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, in the context of a for each loop, we have this idea of making copies of each of the elements from our numbers. And again, this is just sort of a useful thing for control flow where we want to look at each of our numbers here and just be able to not mutate them, but use this collection to do something useful. Now, if we actually want to use a loop here to modify things, then we can use the ref keyword here on our sort of iterator here, or rather how we're referring to each of the individual elements. So now let's go ahead and try this example, and we'll see we get our 6s printed and our whole collection here of, the number 6. Okay, so that's the idea here. So that, again, this ref here allows us to avoid making the copy. And why we might want to use that is if this numbers collection, whether it's an array or an associative array or whatever the data structure is that we're iterating through, this range here, then we might not want to make a copy of each of those individual elements, especially if they're really large elements within some very large collection here. So we just want to refer to them. Now we might have to be careful, and we might not want to actually modify the elements here and have a mutation, but that's just something we'll have to be careful of. So one other thing that I want to go ahead and show you is in the D programming language, you can actually pass in 2 parameters here. I could do I in element here. That's why I sort of rename things. Let's just go ahead and put I, comma, and I'll just go ahead and put a colon here, and then a comma. And we'll kind of repeat this experiment here where I run it. But I, if I specify 2 things, is the index in the for each loop. But again, if I want to actually modify each of these elements here to, whatever number here, 42 or something, then I need to come to the second thing and make sure that that one's passed by ref here. And then we get our 42s here. And that's really it here. So the takeaway from this lesson, again, this is just a short one today, is that you can use ref in for each if you want to actually mutate the individual elements. Now, some other things to be careful about with for each loops, maybe beyond the scope of this video, but we don't want to do element and, reserve some more memory or modify this collection. But otherwise, within a for each loop, we can choose if for the existing things in this container, this data type or data structure, whatever you're iterating through, we are allowed to modify them. We just use the ref keyword. If we don't want modifications, then we get a copy, and then that's also sort of fine here. Of course, if you have more, needs than that, you might just go ahead back to a default for loop. Again, for each is nice because it demonstrates the intent, at least, of iterating through every element. Again, and that's often what I'm doing when I'm creating for loops. So anyways, folks, I hope that was useful. I hope you got to see another use case of the ref keyword, learn something about passing in two different variables, so you can get the index in a for each loop or for each underscore reverse if you also like that. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end this lesson here, just a short one for you. If you have any questions about that, feel free to comment in the discussion. And otherwise, I hope you're enjoying the series. Give a big thumbs up if you are, subscribe so you don't miss these videos. And as always, thank you for your time and attention. I'll look forward to seeing you folks in the next lesson.